During their occupation of the Middle East, the British and French authorities faced great resistance from nomadic Arab tribes who migrated between the border of Syria and Iraq. This border had never existed before and disrupted the lives of the Arab tribes who had historically migrated between the two regions. This border was drawn after the Anglo-French Treaty of 1919 that decided which areas of the Middle East would be under British or French influence. However, this artificial border completely disregarded the livelihoods of the tribes who lived in this region. As a result, many tribes who were previously united were now divided by a border, and many tribes were forced into poverty as they could no longer migrate in search of green pastures. Therefore, many tribes who resided between the border of Iraq and Syria revolted against the British and French authorities on both sides of the border. For example, Sheikh Ajil al-Yawar of the Shammar tribe launched raids from Syria into Iraq in order to attack British forces. In contrast, tribal leaders such as Sheikh Muhammad Faraj al-Salama of the Walda tribe conducted attacks on French forces after crossing the border into Syria from Iraq. Many other Bedouin tribes would frequently conduct raids into British and French territories from opposite sides of the border. However, there was one tribal leader who fought against both French and British authorities. His name was Sheikh Musharraf Al Dandal. Sheikh Musharraf was an influential tribal leader who was born in the desert between Iraq and Syria. He was the leader of the tribe of Al-Hasun. Sheikh Musharraf was born in the town of Abu Kamal, which is located on the desert border between Iraq and Syria. The Anglo-French border divided his tribal territory, leaving him stuck on the Syrian side of the border. After the artificial border was drawn between Iraq and Syria, Sheikh Musharraf and his tribal army launched raids into British-occupied Iraq. He and his tribe managed to ambush and kill many British soldiers. The French authorities in Syria did not disapprove of Sheikh Musharraf's actions as long as he did not threaten French rule in Syria. Therefore, the French allowed him to carry out raids against the British and ignored British requests to stop him. During Sheikh Musharraf's intense battles with the British authorities in Iraq, one of his brothers was killed. After months of fighting, the British attempted to reach a truce and a ceasefire with the tribal forces of Sheikh Musharraf. The British stated that if he surrendered, the British would pay him compensation. However, Sheikh Musharraf refused to be bribed and stated that he would never sell his land and the blood of his brothers. In the year 1920, the people of Iraq began a rebellion against the British colonial authorities due to oppressive British policies such as high taxation. Therefore, the British withdrew their forces from the border and focused their resources on crushing the Iraqi rebellion. Sheikh Musharraf took advantage of the chaos in Iraq and occupied the town of Al-Qaim in western Iraq. Sheikh Musharraf joined forces with Iraqi rebels and attacked British soldiers. Sheikh Musharraf and his tribal forces managed to cut off communication lines between Baghdad and Mosul and inflicted heavy losses on the British. By 1921, the British handed over Iraq to King Faisal and avoided direct rule. After the Iraqi Revolution, Sheikh Musharraf crossed the border back into Syria and managed to smuggle thousands of weapons into Syria. He and his tribe were now preparing to overthrow French rule in Syria. However, when French authorities were informed of Sheikh Musharraf's activities, they began to bomb his tribe. After heavy bombardment, Sheikh al-Musharraf and his tribe fled to Iraq, where they were welcomed by the Al-Dulaym tribe. Sheikh Musharraf continued to smuggle weapons into Syria to help Syrian revolutionaries fight against the French occupiers. While he was in Iraq, Sheikh Musharraf managed to send thousands of guns and huge volumes of ammunition to Syrian freedom fighters. He stayed in Iraq for many years and finally returned to Syria in the year 1941, when he and his tribe conducted a well-calculated ambush on French forces at the Iraqi border. Sheikh Musharraf and his tribal forces contributed to liberating the city of Deir al-Zur from French forces. After Syria was liberated from French rule, Sheikh Musharraf Al Dandal continued to speak out against injustice and supported the oppressed people. During the Syrian elections of 18th July 1947, Sheikh Musharraf boycotted the elections because of the government intervention and manipulation of the election process. Sheikh Musharraf was later arrested by the Syrian government for speaking out against corruption. After the death of Sheikh Musharraf Al Dandal, the political influence of his tribe began to decline. When the Syrian dictator known as Hafiz al-Assad came to power, he suppressed the voices of the descendants of Sheikh Musharraf, as his family and his tribe were known to be rebellious. Sheikh Musharraf Al Dandal left a legacy of resistance against foreign invasions and tyrannical regimes.